Welcome back. Now that we've got our AdventureWorks sample database installed, I want to take a few minutes to familiarize you with that database and also with SQL Server Management Studio if you haven't already used it. Now, if you're taking this course, I assume that you have a solid background in SQL, but I do not assume that you necessarily have a background in SQL Server or have used some of the SQL Server specific tools like Management Studio here. So if you came from an Oracle background, it's probably going to be pretty easy and intuitive for you to learn how to use Management Studio. But that said, I'll walk you through a couple of the features that we'll use the most. So first, over here on the left is Object Explorer, which is sort of a catalog of the objects in our database. For the purposes of this course, we're mostly going to be hanging out under this databases section. In fact, I think we'll entirely be hanging out under there. The other sections are more for database administration type tasks. And specifically, we'll be under the AdventureWorks 2019 database. As you can see, Object Explorer is basically just a kind of tree-like structure that has headings that when you click the plus sign to the left of the heading, you see a series of subcategories, and then you click the plus signs next to those, and you get even more subcategories all the way down. So the subcategory I just clicked was tables, and as you might imagine, that's probably where we're going to spend most of our time in this course. So under AdventureWorks 2019 here, the tables section lists out all the tables in our database. And as you can see, it's quite a few. Probably not many compared to a production or commercial database, but enough to give us something to chew on. Now, digging a little deeper, if we click up the plus sign to the left of an individual table, let's say, for example, our sales order header table, which is one that we're going to be querying against a lot, you now see different categories pertaining to metadata about the table, the columns, the keys, constraints, indexes, etc. And then if you click the plus sign in front of, say, columns, now you get a list of all the columns in that table, their respective data types, and other information like whether that column is a primary key, a foreign key, or what have you. Now, one cool trick you can do in Management Studio is if you want to just preview the data in a table without having to write out the SQL by hand, you can right-click the table over here in Object Explorer and just choose Select Top 1000 Rows. And SQL will automatically write a Select Top 1000 query for you, so it's just a nice convenient way to get a little preview of a table if you're curious about what's in it, about what the data looks like, without you having to write the SQL by hand. I personally use this a lot. A lot of times I'll use Select Top 1000 to generate the code, and then I'll go in and modify it however I need to, so it can kind of function as almost a starter or a template. Now let's say we wanted to select the top 2,000 rows instead. To run this query, again, you would click the Execute button here, or alternatively, just hit F5 on your keyboard. Now if we wanted to write our own query brand new from scratch, you would click the New Query button here. And once you do that, the first thing you probably want to do is check this box here that currently says AdventureWorks 2019, just to make sure the database that you're interested in querying against is selected. Sometimes the master database will be selected by default, which is not the one that has our sample data. So when you're creating a new query with that New Query button, just make sure AdventureWorks 2019 is selected, or if you're at work and you're using SQL Server, make sure whatever database that you're trying to query is selected in that window when you're writing a new query. If it's not, sometimes you'll run up against a nasty surprise when the code that you've written doesn't run because it's pointing to the wrong database. So then if we write a query and we want to save it, so let's just write something super simple like select hello world, just for old time's sake, for tradition's sake. Then you would click File, Save As, and just choose the name of your query. We'll just call it hello, and save. And then if we want to open a query that we have closed, that's just as intuitive. So let's go ahead and close our hello.sql file here. And then to open it back up, you just go to File, Open, File, and then we just browse to wherever our file is located in the file system, select it, and click Open. Now there are lots of other menus and toolbars in Management Studio that I'm not going to waste your time going through, because what we have already covered is what you're going to use 90% of the time in this course and on the job. So the last thing I want to go over is just a brief review of a couple of the tables in our database that we're going to be using most of the time. Probably the biggest thing to understand is the difference between our sales order header table here and our sales order detail table. So we've already taken a brief look at our sales order header table via the top 1000 query we did against it. And just looking at the data, rows in the table are unique by sales order ID. Basically what's going on with this table is that there is one row per sales order. Now by contrast, if we go look at our sales order detail table, this table is not unique by sales order ID. Right off the bat, you see that certain sales order IDs are repeated multiple times. That's because this table has a row for every line item in a sales order. So say somebody orders, for example, 2 bicycles and 5 bicycle helmets, all as part of one order. That order is going to get one row in our sales order header table, but it's going to get as many rows in our sales order detail table as there were items in the order. So in other words, there is a one-to-many relationship between our sales order header table and our sales order detail table, and I'm going to be leveraging that relationship in a lot of examples that we'll work through throughout the course. Similarly, there is a purchase order header table and a purchase order detail table. They work very similarly to their sales counterparts. There's a similar one-to-many relationship between the purchase order header table and the purchase order detail table, and sometimes we'll use this pair of tables instead of the sales tables or in addition to the sales tables for other types of examples. Another table that we'll use quite a bit is the human resources.employee table, which has a variety of information about all the employees in our fictional company. Their titles, their birth dates, hire dates, the amount of vacation time they have, etc. Useful data points for some of the types of calculations that we're going to practice doing as part of the course. A couple of other tables that we'll see from time to time are the person.person table, which just has a row for every person associated with our fictional company, whether in a capacity as a customer or as an employee. And then we'll also occasionally be using our production.product table, which has information about all the products that our company sells. Again, a lot of kind of juicy text and numerical data in here that we can creatively apply criteria for that will be useful for demonstrating certain types of examples. All right, my goal at this point is not for you to be an expert in SQL Server Management Studio by any means. I really just want you to have enough knowledge to work through the code examples that I'll be presenting as we go, because it's that hands-on experience that's really going to get you comfortable and familiar with the application to the point where you can be dangerous with it in the real world. And don't worry about having an encyclopedic knowledge of our sample database. We will be working through plenty of examples that will get you more familiar with with the tables that we're using the most. And now that you know how to use Object Explorer over here on our left, you essentially know how to fish. So if you want more information about a table, you can always just click the plus sign to the left and dig in to see more about the columns and their data types and any keys that are on the table and so on and so forth. All right, so at this point, we should have everything we need in place to actually start coding, which is, I know, why you're here. So without further ado, let's get started with that. I'll see you in the next video.